All right, so it's another day in LA, probably another day everywhere else too. And I'm with Gabe and Evan. Evan and I had a talk a week or so ago that we had a one-on-one and sort of talked through some stuff. And we were just beginning to talk about the fact that our mentality is something that we can struggle with, and make believe is the only struggle there is, and make believe the things we think are true and real and feel stuck in them. And it's all generated by the thinking we do about things. And the idea that we were talking about an article that was written in, I think, Popular Mechanics about whether the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate or a decelerating rate. And the scientists in that felt that they were stuck, and that they were stuck in the problems of the universe rather than they were simply stuck in their thinking about it. And so that's what we're talking about, and getting to coming to terms with the fact that if everything's happening right now as it's happening, and I'm doing what I'm doing to be causal in my perception and experience of what is happening, then to think it shouldn't be happening puts me on a collision course with what is happening, simply by thinking about it in a way that tries to dismiss it, overcome it, handle it, manhandle it, control it, make believe that somehow or another my current thought is going to objectionably eliminate any other thinking I'm doing, rather than simply concede that what's happening is happening and it's all happening right now, and that there is confidence in that awareness and stability in that awareness, simply to concede I'm doing what I'm doing and it is causing the perceptions that I am witnessing right now. If I start there, I have a great chance of being able to start thinking in ways that would be productive in relation to everything, rather than feel conflicted about all those things being impossible to accomplish. Because if I'm the one causing the conflict at the core of my thinking, the simplest level of my thinking, everything else is going to look incredibly difficult as long as I maintain that idea and I have that as the instability of my seeming experience. And I'm pretty good at that. Been doing it long enough to know that it's probably worth talking about.
For me, this is related to step one for me, because step one for me is all about accepting reality, but you've got to be honest about it. It doesn't really work if you're not being honest about it, and that really is, in order to be honest, you've got to move past the subjective experience of it into acceptance of the objective.
Yeah, and that movement at least lets you begin to participate at a level where you don't feel stuck in the subjective ideas. And yet you can be subjective and also have objective thoughts, and start to see that that's a very flexible relate. If that exists, if subjectivity and objectivity exists, then it exists. It's just how we see things. Whether I see it from the subjective or the objective is a choice I make. And to make believe all I'm doing is seeing it from the subjective, to your point about being honest about truth, if I think my thoughts are real, I'm not being honest about truth at all, because my thoughts are imagined. They're a byproduct of reality. And if I think I need to accept reality before reality's reality, I again think I need to get credit for it, rather than say, well, it's already real no matter what I think. I might as well begin to think in alignment with that, rather than think it has something over me or I have something over it that I can't seem to overcome. And that's the ultimate surrender. The surrender in the first step, talking about powerlessness over alcohol, is really powerless over the idea that I can control and enjoy it. And I know in my experience, as long as I had that idea, I drank out of control and used drugs out of control to prove I had control. I used to think the more I did it, the more I was proving, look, I can get by. I'm still standing. I can still drive. I can still go to work. I can still pull off all these things. While I wasn't really noticing that all those things I was doing were at high risk, and the probability of something eventually going seriously wrong was growing, because the odds eventually are going to turn. If I get away with it for a long time and think I'm getting away with it, I'm going to think there's no other option than getting away with it. And eventually that's I've had friends spend 18 years in prison for running somebody over in a crosswalk, reaching into the glove box while they were drunk in a car, and others in the exact same thing. Another guy I watched, I went to a party. He was going to San Quentin for 7 years for hitting somebody second time in a crosswalk. Didn't kill him, but the kid had brain damage.
Yeah.
So he ended up on the fire lines, which was probably good for him because he was outdoors and doing so. He was a very healthy guy. But, facing 7 years is tough, but facing brain damage for life is even tougher. Those consequences occur. So, and this is talking of, and as you and I have talked about, it's really beginning to surrender thinking to reality in the sense that it's a byproduct of reality. If there's an all-knowing, ever-present, absolute source, then we already know what we know. And to think we need to know it is to also think we don't know it at the same time. Rather than say, no, I know it, I just keep thinking things that I think I need control. I need understanding. I need to put it in words that I can understand it. And if I don't understand it, I don't think it's real. When in fact, understanding is a product of thinking. Again, if I can't understand it, it's a good example of the fact that I may have some things to learn. But maybe if what I've been learning is to pretend I'm in control of it, denying it, maybe that isn't the best lesson. Maybe that's learning to get worse.
Yeah, it's pretty self-centered to think that if I can't articulate something, it doesn't exist.
Right. And yet that's basically the premise. If I think I don't belong, think about that. How could I not belong if I didn't belong? If I'm thinking subjectively all the time, I'm really not seeing objectively that the end of my subjective thoughts is the beginning of everything else, because I think it's the end of everything else. And if in fact there is an objective view, meaning a view beyond my own conclusions and my own thinking, that's a very willing interest in learning and growth and saying, oh, there are other options. Everybody's perception is different to some degree. None of them are identical. Nobody's thinking the exact combination of thoughts based on the exact experience. And yet we can all experience the exact same thing and with different perception think of it differently, while in fact that thing stays the same. When you're talking about truth and reality, I would say that would be the essence of this sort of essential nature of nature.
So what were they saying about dark energy or dark matter?
Well, they're starting to see, they used to think the speed was constant, and they're starting to realize it may be slowing as the expansion occurs.
Mm.
And if that's the case, it would be doing what they see stars do, which is to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then they start to shrink and shrink and shrink, and they eventually become black holes.
Mm-hmm.
So they seem to create an absence. But part of the issue is that dark matter is really, they're just coming to terms with the fact that space, well, we have thought it as nothing. This is perfect spiritual context. Well, we have thought of it as nothing actually contains more matter than everything we've thought of as everything. So that nothing really is something without having things in it. And yet the substructure is actually subatomically, it is everything. It's the basis of everything. We just don't see it, so we didn't think it existed. We thought because we could see through space, there was nothing in between us and whatever we saw. Tie that to the mental condition. It's very, very similar because it's all coming from the basis of thinking. Stuff has been going on here a lot longer than humans have even existed and thought. And it's been doing it perfectly while we've been basically thinking we need to, exactly as you just said, we need to understand it before we can dominate it and control it. Because we really think thinking is reality. We need to dominate it with our reality, our truth. It isn't truth and reality to make believe that reality and truth is what we make of it. That's make believe. That's fantasy is reality. That's insanity. That's delusion. Can we think those things? Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
And that ultimately is a loving freedom to give us the chance to, you want to go so wrong as to make believe the only thing you can do is shoot yourself in the head or become addicted to something to distract yourself from the pain you're creating and the contempt you're creating and your own inner conflict and mental anguish and emotional turmoil? Be my guest. Because that same freedom that allows us to think does not condemn us for what we think. And yet we create the condemnation and think that it's some outside source causing us to do that, punishing us, so that we can, again, try to be irresponsible for the responsibility we have in the choices we make that cause the effects that we either like or don't like.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So the craving within we think of the craving in the body, right, as one of the components of addiction. It's really the craving for the next thought that will someday become true, someday become real. If I just think harder and longer and identify myself with it and own it and make it my truth. People say this, if you tell a lie enough, it becomes reality. Think about that. How could a lie ever be reality if it's a lie? The contention is more and more people believe it, and then it becomes reality. That would make believe reality. But in fact, make believe is pretty clearly fantasy.
Yeah, but nature's always my sponsor says this, and I love this. It's nature is always changing, always moving forward, and always right now. And we're sort of like in this feedback, sort of mutual feedback zone of ideally moving with nature and being a part of nature rather than fighting it.
Well, and we are naturally a part of it. While
Yeah.
making believe we're not is the fight.
Mm-hmm.
See, the difference in the delusion is that we can be in full flight from reality, as the book says. 1,000 different forms of delusion never add up to reality. Because reality never changes and never leaves and never disappears, because it's always present, it's always here, it's always now. And it's just a word for that present state of awareness, that present state of knowing.
Yeah.
But the craving is really this uncomfortable craving that the next thought's going to fix it, but it's also the awareness that the present thought is wrong and isn't fixed. Think of how clear it is that we're operating on a basis that we're absolutely aware of, and then pretend by focusing on a moment that isn't here yet that we're avoiding the one that is here, and we're distracting ourselves from it, and that is not attractive. The book says attraction rather than promotion. What are we doing? Promotion. We're trying to go forward in motion while we're not allowing what's happening now to become our experience. And it actually is our experience. We're just playing that game that it shouldn't be happening. So I don't think it's happening. And as a result, I don't think it's happening. I'm now on I'm on a crusade to make believe that everything that isn't happening is all that's happening, and everything that is happening isn't happening at all. And the book says we suffer from a lack of proportion. Make nothing out of everything and everything out of nothing. It's a reversal of fortune, literally. We're very fortunate until we start thinking that way, and all of a sudden things don't seem to go as fortunately as they otherwise might.
Yeah, and that's actually not the way nature works. Nature is not, anxiety doesn't really, about future isn't really part of the natural world. It's
right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know science pretty well.
Well, just as a layman, I'm interested.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but you've done work in the hospitals and with blood and all that kind of stuff, So there's some evidence that we're always looking for what's actually happening. What's wrong with somebody in a hospital bed? How aware of it can we be? If we start from the premise that we're not even where we are and shouldn't be where we are, and then we're going to search for something that seems to be hidden, what are the chances where we're going to find it?
Yeah, well, I mean, medicine in general is it's pretty interesting. There's a general lack of awareness and in most of us, my instinct is this is because it's a very scary prospect of how unexact of a science medicine really is. It's we're still at the forefront of this like frontier of understanding, and especially complex organs like the brain, for instance. Even at the tip of the spear teaching hospitals in the first world, it's a bunch of people ultimately sitting around interpreting lab work and imaging and clinical observations and making sort of like their best guess on like what might help this person. There's no
Mhm.
there's often no definitive. I mean, it's my daughter. My daughter has these seizures, and she has these yeah, she's okay. She's overall, pretty happy and healthy little girl, but she has these abnormal firings from the back right portion of her brain, and it's related to her developmental disability. But yeah, I mean, it's a complete trial and error treatment for something like that. Different medications, different regimen. It's a complete trial and error. And here we are in 2024 thinking that something like medicine has all the answers if you can just understand it and just get enough information. And it's just really not the case. Yeah.
Well, and that process of trial and error is obviously admitting that there is much error in the trial. It doesn't say trial and solution, because
Yeah.
the point is there, even in medicine, even in the best knowledge, let's apply it and see what happens. Let's apply this, what we think it is, and see what the outcome is.
Yeah.
There's a willingness to look at the consequence and say, is this patient getting better? And in our own experience, if I'm getting worse and actually making believe I'm getting better so that I can maintain the contention that I'm not causing the problem, what am I getting better at, but getting worse? And getting better at denying the worse that I'm getting. That blind spot the books talks about, that strange mental blind spot that seems to get us back to the bar where Bill Wilson was hammering on the bar. How did I get here? How did I get? As though he wasn't there the whole time. Because we're
Yeah.
literally
And
making
not,
believe we're not where we are. We shouldn't be here, so we're not here. And I need to get somewhere else that never comes, because there is no other place than where we are in the present. And like you were saying, dogs, horses. I know Brad, you talk to Brad a lot. Brad's like a horse whisperer. He says horses aren't worrying. They're not thinking. They're
yeah.
just doing. They're just acting in accordance with. And I would say they're thinking, but they're acting in accordance with what their interests are. If they're
Yeah.
grazing, they're grazing. They're eating. They're just minding their business. They're not trying to worry about what's next.
Hmm.
But my sense is our greatest advantage as humans is that we're able to contemplate our thinking and contemplate life and contemplate our birth and death and all of the elements of our experience. That's an advantage that we've turned to a disadvantage by making believe, simply because I can think about my thinking itself, that it becomes me, because I make believe I know I'm the creator of reality, pitting my whole experience against reality rather than ever coming to a conclusion that could actually mimic reality in any healthy, gainful way, because it doesn't need to be mimicked. It's already complete, it's already whole, it's already absolute, it's already in every respect doing what it's doing. And all we're struggling with is our interpretation. If the baseline of my interpretation is such that my thinking about my whole existence is wrong, I'm only fighting to be right all the time about it. I'm not looking for information that could contest it. I'm looking for more information to support the contention that I'm right. So I want to
Yeah.
manipulate and coerce and make believe that when people nod their head, they're giving me a vote and they're saying, you're right. Yes, I really like you. I really love you. I'm your friend. So I'm not going to contest you on these things. I'm just going to let you spew that stuff and let you go ahead and make believe that everybody else agrees with you.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot in relation to acceptance, um, because um, because there's all it's an important part of early recovery is acceptance, but um, but the maybe the most useful acceptance to like cultivate is just the simple fact that reality doesn't care how we feel about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, the reality probably doesn't feel. You know,
Right.
emotions are probably unique to the condition we have where we can contemplate how we think, and emotions give us a gauge on how well we're doing with that thinking. It tells us our well-being. When I feel conflicted, I'm obviously feeling thoughts that are conflicted. So that would not be in my best interest if I continued to make believe I wasn't doing it. And like you were talking
Hmm.
about the scientists, a good scientist is open to all possibilities in the face of limited information. A sailor is open to the possibility of being off course all the time, so they can obviously adjust accordingly. And my experience is I never know what's right until I try something and it works or doesn't work. I can think it's right, and I can think by not acting on it that my rightness is right, and that acting on it would then I would actually become lazy and slothful, because if I actually did anything, I would immediately realize it isn't right. It's not working. It's not functioning the way I imagined it would. Instead of living in that sort of daydream mentality of thinking about my thinking being the only source of my reality. And if I can conclude something, that must be right, it must be real, it must be true. And that's it. Don't fuck with me. We become very sensitive to how other people think about us and how they feel about us,
Sure.
because we're so invested in making believe that we are thought and we are dependent on thought. And in fact, we are in a healthy sense. But the kind of thought we're talking about is not healthy at all, because it's actually trying to claim it is reality rather than a byproduct of reality designed to express reality, rather than designed to express the conflicted ideas we have about reality. If you look at the world, you see a lot of evidence for that kind of behavior going on. So I don't need to worry about them if I've still got some work to do about this right here. So
Mm.
my sense is, if we're talking about it publicly, we're talking about it socially, and we're starting to actually have a chance to actually address society in a conversation and say, look, if we all have the basic platform that's identical, our DNA structure is almost identical, we're very few percentages away from other animals similar to us, and yet they function very differently to us. But if we are close to them, we're almost identical to one another, while we're having different experiences with different thoughts, and making more or less out of things in our own experience doesn't make those things we've made more or less of more or less. It just means it's what we're thinking about. If we can talk about that openly and see the common nature of it, my sense is the paradigm capacity to shift consciousness rather than feel trapped by ideas that seem to be so pervasive there's no other choice happens very quickly. Generally, like in my experience and many experiences of the people I've worked with in sobriety, they all of a sudden look back 2 months and say, I haven't even been doing that thing used to bother me. I didn't even notice I wasn't doing it. I said, yeah, because nature isn't conflicted. There's really nothing to notice. It's just so natural that you do it. You act on it. And it's like 2 plus 2 is easy to start to reapply, or riding a bike is easy to do once you know how to do it. You don't really need a lot of experience to go back to it and say, how did I do that? How did I learn that? What was it? You don't need that whole complicated effort. It goes away because you've aligned with it. Now you don't have to think about it at all. You just choose to do it. Boom, done. Happening. That's intuition in its ultimate sense. It's really contemplative meditation is simply considering things. And being considerate is not being inconsiderate. Simple. Being considerate is being open, noticing that whatever the thoughts are that seem right could seem like limits, but you can also start to see limits as something that clearly is indicating some wrong. Because if we're dealing in an infinite reality, subjective and objective happen to be two of the same things, just two different positions to take in relation to everything. But the absolute isn't a position we take at all. It's the essence of our being that isn't an option. It isn't a choice. It isn't a negotiation. It's just the nature of nature. It's the nature of who we are as we are. Sand knows what to be better than we seem to without any thinking. So it really points to the fact that this collision of thought is the human dilemma. that we've been looking for an answer as though more desperate thinking would lead us to a conclusion. And if you look through history, humans have been seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking forever and looking for somebody to rely on
Yeah.
because of their own unreliability. We're actually admitting we don't rely on our own experience by thinking somebody else is going to do it for us. They've got the answer. We need a cult hero. We need an icon. We need somebody who isn't not like us to do it for us, which is almost the seeking of God in another human.
Yeah. 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 It's like this, these two things have been present throughout like the history of our species, or at least the history of our species. We can kind of you know discern from archaeology and stuff. But this hunger for a closeness to God and a conscious contact with the higher power, but then also B, struggling with the human institutions that almost immediately start getting built on top of that.
Well, and institutions or organizations are just like the self-centered idea we have about ourselves. It's just a collection of people who now have something to defend because their ideas they think are right and real, which means that anybody outside the scope of their institution is a threat. Either needs to be
Right.
included, they're either with them or against that sort of thinking. Versus just saying we can choose to do whatever we want with each other and it doesn't change any of our reality at all. What it changes are the manifestation of effects we create, the transformation we make, and the health and benefit of those transformative experiences for everyone compared to just the few, meaning almost no one. No organization adds up to so many people that it is not dwarfed by the entire population of the world. None.
Yeah, and I also think that there's this longing for conscious contact in our species with a power greater than ourselves, and I also think that there's this like longing for sort of an ego death, that we have this instinct would be good for us, but sort of manifest in all these ways that are not healthy, like addiction, for instance, and even suicide. The slow suicide, the million slow suicides we participate in every day. It's I didn't, for the longest time, I didn't have any idea of like how that could possibly be related to like a how is nature selecting for that? How does nature select for traits in a species that is ultimately suicidal? you know, when a friend of mine who actually um, has tremendous experience with addiction and lived experienced psychosis and living homeless for years on the streets of Chicago, said he said it like plain as day. He goes, yeah, but I don't think people really want to kill themselves. I think they long for this, like, to be unburdened from their ego. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting that if this false self is false, just let's consider that. We think of the ego as a false self, technically, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's false, how do we have the presumption to believe it's alive? It's literally fantasy acting as reality. It's coming back to this thought that's looking for support that we are thinking is real. So what we think of must also be real, and then we identify it as false. False is never the answer or a solution to any problem. It doesn't have any
Mm-hmm.
place in reality. Nothing. It has no place. You can apply it as long as you want, as hard as you want, as many times as you want, as insistent as you want. It's not going to work. 2 + 2 is never going to be 5. But you can think it is. And that's what we call delusion. Coming to what I think is real simply because I concluded my thinking is, again, thinking is reality. When thinking is largely imagined. You said it's a best guess. We're analytically processing all the information, the things we think we're thinking, and there's other things going on inside of us that we don't even think we're thinking, that are making calculations all the time based on the information they're getting back from our synapses and the organs and all of the interactions that the body is doing. Trillions of various chemical combinations constantly being conveyed to the overall senses of the body to say, is there anything wrong? How would we know that? Pain. How do we know what's mentally wrong? Emotional turmoil, inner conflict, mental anguish, anxiety, stress, depression, compulsiveness, impulsiveness, reactiveness, jitteriness, worrying all the time.
Yeah.
Animals that tend to worry a lot have generally been beaten by humans.
Right.
And the only animals on Earth that get psychiatric help are domesticated.
Yeah.
They literally give horses, dogs, drugs. So we become accustomed to we don't think of the problem in its actual terms. So we've been treating the symptom as though it's the only thing we can do. We're trying to help people feel better. And very little talk goes into, there's been plenty through history, but little talk socially goes into the thinking that creates the problems, the mental diseases, the mental illness that creates and manifests the issues in bodies that become susceptible to those conditions from the anxiety and stress that's imposed on the body. If my metabolism is undermined by an inability of me to just think straight because the stress that's going on constantly has it do things it can't understand because it's insane, literally. Our body's not designed to process insanity. Our brain doesn't know what to do with it any more than we know what to do with alcohol if our body is unable to metabolize sugar, which is largely the component of alcoholism. An abnormal response to something is to do the thing you can't do more and more and more to prove you can do it. Kind of like poison ivy. Scratching it feels good for a second, but it spreads it. So the thing you're trying to stop lasts. Yet, people with peanut allergies do not get near peanuts because they know when they start suffocating, that's not something they want. And the difference between this abnormal reaction seems to be, do we feel better or do we feel worse? So to think better feeling is solution when we're getting worse is where disease continues to grow and grow and grow until it gets so bad we finally can't deny that something is wrong because the pain becomes so pervasive. And the book says pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. And it's interesting, we need pain as a guidance system because we've become so desensitized to the discomfort that is caused immediately in our experience. That sense of doubt, that sense of uncertainty, that sense of displacement, and all that, they're immediate when we're thinking things that aren't true. Yet we need proof in the future because of the ability we have to deny the present and what's happening. We think denial is our savior. It's actually like psychic anesthesia. And for a moment, you get adrenaline, you get a hit of dopamine, whatever you get when you deny something. There's a charge that comes from it that can feel very exciting and very powerful. But it's actually like an emergency response that our instincts would have if there was an actual threat. And now it's using our body for a fantasy threat, a nightmare that we're living during the day. And it's actually utilizing resources that should be readily available for actual threats because it's now causing the threat. Now the thinking I'm doing in my instinct has turned instincts around. So fighting is denial. Flight is this idea I can escape into other things and the next moment will prove me right. Not now. I don't want to be proven right now because I'm wrong. But the next moment that I can fantasize about that isn't ever anything but the present when I'm in it will save me. And freezing, numbing, desensitizing, thinking not feeling things is the goal. I feel better when I don't feel things. Well, if feelings are our guidance system, to be desensitized is to put us at great risk. And there are kids that are born without the ability to feel, and they generally don't last through their teens because something happens and they don't even know to mention it. Doesn't feel, they don't feel it. It's an excellent guidance system that we have, and to deny it is to make believe that somehow or another it doesn't have any purpose, while our only purpose is to act as though it doesn't exist. That's just fantasy. And it isn't reality, it's just a manifestation of an effect that can be very, very educational if we're sensitive enough or willing enough to begin to admit what's happening in the present and talk about it and just say, I feel frustrated. I feel frustrated a lot. Not everybody does what I'd like them to do in the way I think it should be done. Driving's a great example of that. People make their own decisions. They don't always align with mine. I don't want to act as though it's not happening, or I would be running into people all the time. I wouldn't be prepared to respond accurately. And responsibility is the ability to respond, not react and deny and set this whole emergency trend in my system off as though it's the only thing I can do when I become the cause of the threat in my own experience. And then act as though it's nothing I'm doing. It's happening to me. So the idea in suicide is that the self we're trying to kill even has a life. It doesn't. We think of our thoughts so seriously that we really believe the ego exists and it's happening to us, because we talk about that. My ego's getting the best of me. Think about that. It would have to have a separate life to be doing that. And all it is imagined. It's just thought to exist. It's just thinking about thinking itself now being turned into myself and ourself. But we talk about it as though it's alive and think we need to kill the body that's thinking of it, rather than say, the thought's delusional. It's never been there at all. It literally has never existed except to the thinking I've done about it as though it's real. So if I'm thinking it's real and then on that conflicted basis trying to fix it, I'm in an interminable, frustrating process that's never going to get better. So I say, I can't take it anymore. I just can't take this. It's too much. It is too much. I can't turn nothing into anything, much less everything.
It's pretty
Yikes.
interesting.
Yeah, well, it's worth considering. I don't say this because I think it's right. It's just my experience that when I began to notice things and take the words and think of them as actually representing the thing that they're representing, like absolute. If you look up absolute, there aren't any exceptions to it. The 12 steps are based on principles, and the principles are absolutes. They don't change. How we use them changes, like you mentioned. How we interact with them changes. How we think about them changes. But if we begin to notice that they never change and simply concede that to thinking, thinking calms down very quickly, because you begin to realize, oh, I'm introducing my knowing awareness to my thinking now, rather than introducing insane ideas to it and wonder why my thinking seems so unstable and so embarrassing on top of it. The definition of self-consciousness is undue regard for appearance. Why, if our self was conscious, would we worry about how it looks? It would have no bearing whatsoever, because we would just know what to do and do that. And if people had an opinion about it, we'd say, oh, great, you have an opinion. Thanks. You have a thought. Wow. What a surprise. You have a brain with a thought. Oh, wow. That's not surprising. I expect everybody has a thought. Now I'm not threatened by thinking. I'm simply recognizing we think about things. Okay. Doesn't condemn me at all. Zero. And it doesn't condemn the person having the contemptful thoughts either, except to the thinking they do about the contempt they're creating, and then make believe it isn't them. So it must be something else, someone else, somewhere else. Always, always, always searching. We seem to be searching for something else, and yet we think the problem is somewhere else. Interesting that the two would line up identically. Flip sides of the same insanity. Trying to be reality. We're trying to create that subjective, objective experience. To say, oh, yeah, well, it sure seems like it. Yeah, well, things are not how they seem or appear. They're how they are, always. Morning, Harry and Mark.
Morning, Jack.
Morning, guys.
So talking about it, in my experience, is revelatory. And we don't all have to think about it the same to recognize that we have a knowing nature that we've always known. And that sense you were talking about, Evan, about this sense of God, this sense of thing in us. And it only seems to be in us because my brain is registering what my body is telling it. And yet it would also, if there's any objectivity, it would also be without me in that regard too, without this self I call my own. So it would be in and out. It wouldn't be just in, or it wouldn't be out. So it's kind of like the space we were talking about. All of a sudden they see space we can see through. All of a sudden they're realizing has more matter in it than all the matter we think is there. But the subatomic level seems to be invisible to us. We don't know it's there, and yet it's the substructure of the entire existence that we're living. In some way, I don't know. I don't know that that's actually accurate, but it seems to be at this point.
No, my instinct is that it is in some way. I mean, I think even it's hopefully in our lifetime they'll be able to discover more about it. But I think there's a good chance that something as simple and present with us as our consciousness is connected to quantum processes.
And
that we do not yet understand.
Well, and we think we need to understand it for it to be, rather than concede it's not going to be any level of understanding that finally has us ultimately aware of it, because we've been aware of it the whole time because we're byproducts of it. We're of it. And what we have been doing is basically bastardizing our experience by making believe once we're of it that we're not of it. And we need to figure it out. And until we do, we don't understand it. We don't know it. And it's a mystery. Think about that. We think of the mysteries in the universe. There are no mysteries. Everything's doing everything it's doing right now. That is not a mystery. It's actually happening right now. And if you concede in the simplest way, the other awareness starts to open up, because you're not fighting at the simplest level. You're not creating this delusional landscape of a small world of our own reality, of our own truth, and then fighting for it as though somehow it'll get better one day, and wondering why days don't seem to feel that way. The splendor, the enormity of this awareness is awe-inspiring, literally an adventure, an exploration of unparalleled consideration, because we can't even imagine and fathom the immensity of this because of that thinking we've been thinking about in relative spatial dimensional terms, time and space terms, as thinking that's all that exists. It's interesting that we would imagine the least of what's happening in the universe would be all that's happening, and all that's happening in the universe would not be happening at all until we figure it out.
And it's a story. Yeah, it's a story that gets repeated again and again and again. Every time science, is sure that then the about these human migrations, you know what I mean? These human migrations in prehistory, like out of Africa and through Asia and into the Americas, and every time they get sure about this or that, then they inevitably will sequence someone's genome buried in a cave and Mexico or Australia. And they're like, wait, no, this is actually completely different than what we thought. Yeah.
Well, consider every thought we conclude is immediately challenged by all other thoughts and ideas that exist. And what isn't being thought of now is being thought of now. So what seems to be then was limited by what was conceived, literally like the conception of a child in that embryonic state. And what's conceived now is in addition to all of that cumulative experience is always building. And if what we're building with are blocks, the building blocks are the blockheadedness that we have when we think our case is so sufficient that we're exceptional and completely unique to it all, and can't ever get better because we're just idiots and just keep doing the wrong thing. And I'm just inadequate and I don't have any worth and value. We're identifying all the things we're thinking rather than the reality that we're actually witnessing and experiencing. We would not know how dismal to be if we didn't have an awareness of something that was magnificent that we simply are denying. We'd think being small was everything. People say, oh, I'm just a speck in the universe. I said, if that was actually true, you would be fulfilled by that idea rather than feel dwarfed by it all. You would say,
Mm.
that's as much as I can be. I'm 100% of a speck. Wow, look at me. I'm dust in the wind. We don't think of it that way. We think of it to justify the insignificance of our presence here, rather than realize if we're connected to all of it, that is not insignificant at all. And great fullness is beginning to notice the fullness of greatness that is actually our birthright, because it is the nature of existence that preceded the birth of our body, and will exceed it too, because it isn't in space and time. It's an absolute state of being that never changes. So there is no, if it's always new, it can't get old. So it's not on the time continuum. My sense is that infinitesimal moment that Leibniz and Isaac Newton and all of them turned into calculus is the immediacy of the present that can't be defined in any quantitative terms. It can't get small enough to not be big enough to block something else. So that infinitesimal state is an ever-present state, which is exactly where the reality and truth always is. Well, we're thinking of the past and leaping into the future, thinking somehow we can avoid it here to support the contention that our thinking is reality and truth. So if we're lying about reality and truth, how well are we going to do to figure out the mysteries of the universe? Not very well. We're not going to even look. Einstein said he used to go into his office and act like a 9-year-old because he could start thinking about things without all the confines of the ideas that had accumulated that he knew weren't right. He knew that somewhere in them there was something else, bigger, more profound. What was it? Simple and elegant. Just like the lines in calculus became very fluid compared to the choppy points in XY coordinates in algebra. So there's elegance and simplicity and beauty, and it isn't complicated because there's no lack, there's no bits and pieces, there's no parts. It's just the beginning of noticing, oh, that's our nature. And what am I going to do with that nature? How well am I going to express that nature? That's well-being. Well-being doesn't say well-thinking, it says well-being. Our being is the basis of our wellness, and to express it in our thinking is to begin to actually use that intuitive knowingness, that absolute awareness, and have it come through us before we can even think about what we said and say, wow, did that just come out of my mouth? Where did that come from? And there's a clarity in that that's profound. Mark and I have been talking a lot about some of the little bubbles that have popped in his head. And it's profound to listen to people start to notice this because it's happening for all of us all the time. Profound is for finding, by the way, rather than constantly seeking. And to your point too, Evan, going back in history, philosophers and seekers and seers and maharishis and gurus and all the people who have they've talked about this, some of them in the way that you have to do things to get it, if we have to do things to get it, that means we're bigger than it, so we can keep it from us. That story's been going on and the seeking has gone on. Why are we continuing to seek? We're looking for something that we already have. What greater mystery than making believe the thing we absolutely have isn't something we have and we keep looking for it? That's where the mystery is. It's not in the universe, it's in our thinking. The secret's in our thinking.
There's an obsession in our species to try and recognize the pattern without an understanding and acceptance that we are the pattern. We're a part of the pattern, or we're not the start of a pattern. We are, this is a pattern that has always existed.
Well, and within the patterns, we create ripples. Just like throwing a pebble into a lake. The lake wouldn't just do that if somebody didn't take the time to throw a pebble into it. And that ripple will go out as long as that momentum, as long as the weight relative to the arc, to the landing, as long as it goes, physics will determine it will continue to go to the shores and then bounce back. To some degree, it's happening. And if you look at water in very calm states that have multiple things going on, you can see multiple curvatures of that movement crossing back and forth through each other, like sound. Sound does that same thing.
Yeah.
So if the transformation, if we are life forms rather than the creators of life, and we just happen to be a form of life, we are a projection of life. And what we project into that experience that we all share is a transformation of life within formation. It's all about form, things seen, appearances, objects that can seem real, but they're a product of reality. What are we going to do with them? The best we can do or the worst? We're free to do either. We've been really good at doing the wrong one for a long time. And my sense, as you mentioned earlier, that echo, that feedback, it's literally an echo chamber that has us feel isolated and alone because it's the thinking about the thinking about the thinking about the thinking that's just going around and around and around. And we think that's life. We think that's what thinking is. When I mention this to people, they say, "Oh, you're telling me to stop thinking." I said, "Isn't it interesting that we object to the idea that we're thinking obsessively? And then when I mention obsessive thinking is caused by what we do and can easily be diluted and dissolved, people then come to the conclusion that what I'm saying is don't think. Because we've been thinking obsessively so long that we think that's what thinking is obsessive. We don't even notice it. We're so numb to it. It isn't. It's what we're doing with it. Just like if we were hammering a nail and kept hitting our thumb and thinking, the more I hit my thumb, the closer I'm going to get to that nail. You'd never last. Pain would be too insurmountable at some point. We're treating the effects as the cause historically because we haven't been willing to admit collectively that we are the cause. We are causing it. Doesn't make us the cause of the universe. It makes us the cause of the thoughts that manifest an experience that's so consuming and so intoxicating that we think it's all there is. Because our body goes on overload in terms of the chemical processes that are set in motion. So we're literally causing the disintegration of our body that's perfectly integrated into all that exists. We're breaking it down sooner than is necessary, simply out of the stress and the pressure and the inflammation and all the variations that are occurring in our bodies as a result of the ill-healthy thinking, the mental illness and thought, creating manifestations that mirror it in the body the longer we go.
Jack, just thinking a little bit about what you were mentioning earlier about
Welcome, Mark.
thank you. It's made me think that we were talking about the seeking and how we continue to seek and how I continue to seek. And listening to that, I realized I need to not seek. I need to shed. I need to shed all the shame and inadequacies and all the thoughts, thinking about my thoughts that I've carried and with me, and get back to everything because I have everything. I just need to shed all this weight so I can get to it.
Well, when you're really seeing everything as everything and seeing honestly and sincerely that you have it, those things will not be there at all because they're only there to the degree that you think you're seeking and haven't found, so you need to seek more. And if you already, somebody's visiting you, a child. If we're thinking wrongly about seeking, we're really not looking to find what we're looking for. We're actually looking to support the contention that it isn't out there and it's a mystery and it's hard to find and it's not easy and nobody's ever found it. Why? Because we don't want to admit we're already found. That profound is in fact for finding.
What I'm seeking is a co-conspirator.
You're seeking all kinds of information that gives you conflicted experience to justify, yep, this is really hard. This is really, life's hard. Life's difficult. No, it isn't. It's so simple that it doesn't change. Something that does not change couldn't be simpler. And yet complication is always based simply on not thinking of that. If we have an absolute basis and we start to actually concede, I started this earlier, looking up the word absolute, you realize there's no exceptions. It's not a choice. It's not a negotiation. There isn't more or less of that. We always have it in total. And it's just thinking about it that we are not doing in total. We're not sincere. We're lying about it. We're actually incorrect thinking it's correct. That's called a lie. And we don't have to think we're doing it to be suffering from the consequences of it. The nervousness, the worry about other people thinking about us, finding us out, the worried about being uncovered, discovered. We don't want to, we're kind of like lurking around the shadows, trying to make believe we're not doing what we're doing. That takes a lot of time. Because, and I would say it almost creates time. It creates the illusion of time so we can think there's some place to run and something to run from, rather than the immediacy of our experience has nowhere to go in either direction. And we're capable of conceding that, and it starts to actually melt away the shame, as we've talked about, Mark. My experience was I started crying for the first time in my life, not because I was so disjointed over something that was so horrendous, but because I began to feel the emotions that literally were the moving nature of that emotion, the moving sort of thing that we call, being moved by something, the majesty of the possibility of beginning to reckon with this fact that I've been given all the information. It's my chalkboard. Those feelings are they're plastered on the chalkboard, but I went to class thinking, I'm going to sleep today. I'm not listening. I'm not interested. Teach me what you want. I'm going to sit in the back row with my head on books because I was out partying last night and I don't have the ability to pay any attention, and wonder then why I'm struggling with my grades. They want to throw me out of school. Yeah, you're already out. Nobody needs to throw you out. You've already discontinued the whole thing. We get all the information we need and then act as though it's not happening. It's a pretty dismal approach.
Twice as much energy.
Oh, it's more than that. Because when you consider it takes no energy for an absolute state of being to be our absolute state, none, any energy is infinitely more than that.
Yeah.
Any energy,
it takes
any
100%
motivation.
of my energy. It doesn't leave anything for anything else.
So think of this in relation to the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity. Let's just say God granted me the serenity, which gives me the clarity of what's wrong. And what does it go on to say? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. What can't I change? The absolute nature of things. Why? It doesn't change. So my thinking about it isn't going to help me change it. So if I've got serenity as a guidance system, I know when I'm not accepting things honestly because I feel disturbed. I know I'm disturbed. And what am I? Discouraged because I'm thinking of things incorrectly. And what's the second half of that? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. If there's absolutely an absolute basis for existence, I can't change it. And yet that's been my main problem. Book says it. Self-centeredness has to be smashed. A new spiritual dynamic is what saves us, what actually helps us. Starting to see that there's a spiritual solution. There is a spirit, that there is something, whatever we call it, that actually is a real power. Not this fake power I have and the lie thinking it's going to become true, but the real power. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. What's next? And the
change.
Yeah, and the courage. What happens when I stop fighting the absolute? I'm no longer using discouraging thoughts. And all of a sudden, I have the courage to do the things I can. Why? Because I'm looking at what's actually happening. I'm not looking at the world as an impossibility. I'm starting to say, oh, I don't have any gas. How many people run out of gas thinking they have a full tank or have plenty of gas? They're not thinking about it. No, they're just not thinking about it. It's happening. It's slowly going down. They're not thinking about it. You don't get there by saying, you know what, I'm never going to run out of gas. That tank's always going to be full and I'm never going to run out. If you said that, you'd say, oh, that's stupid. I got to go get gas. But we've been operating on this basis so long, it seems to make so much sense and seems to be the only thing anyone is doing. And it seems preposterous that we could begin thinking otherwise. And yet AA now is coming up on 95 years or 90 years, I think it is, of proven results by people simply beginning to act honestly in relation to what's happened. It's very simple. Doesn't mean they're right. Honesty is not being right. It's talking about what you're doing honestly. I share my thoughts. I share my thoughts and I tell people, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I know that it's what I'm thinking. And if it has to do with you, I want you to know that when I mention this, it really has to do with me because I'm sharing my thought about you. That isn't about you. It's about you in my thinking, but that isn't you that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of my thoughts about you. That now takes the pressure off and opens a conversation rather than condemn somebody to thinking that I'm an asshole for mentioning something. But beginning to get used to being an asshole, enormous amount of freedom because it's really easy to do. Do anything somebody doesn't want, they're going to qualify you as that. It's interesting that we want to get our shit together, but we never want to be called an asshole. The connection is very intimate. And yet we talk about it a lot. I got shit to do. I want to get my shit together. I'll be better when I do. Please. Nothing's going to smell better with more. Our language even betrays our greater understanding. Because when you start looking at it accurately and listen to the thoughts you have and actually just listen to them point blank and literally, you're going to start hearing the stuff you've been perpetuating that is driven by reactiveness and defensiveness and impulsiveness that has nothing to do with what's happening and everything to do with the preconceived idea about reality. And it starts, as you look honestly, it starts to melt naturally. And you can also notice the fear that's been held in that. And that can often be a stop because it feels like a bully. I can't go further because I can't face this. The problem is the further we go, the more of it we're facing. So we're never going to get to the point that it will be easier until we finally succumb to the fact that as soon as I do it, I'm going to be better off. I'm going to feel that fear and let it run through my body rather than maintain it as though it's not happening in my body and let it run its course, creating disease in my body. I'm creating darkness in my body. I'm creating an absence of health. I'm creating a limit of blood's ability to function in the way it's designed to heal and correct and notice things that are going on. There are billions of things going on in our bodies right now that our bodies know exactly what to do with that do not do better when they're under stress. So for us to be doing the thing we think saves us and has it killing us, that's a great example of what addiction is.
Yeah, and it's in so many ways it's what our whole society is built around right now. Just,
well, think of the story of Adam and Eve. You know, the first two kids on earth, one killed the other. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's happened. I don't need to. I know that it's been a story told through history that we live with as though it happened. And if we can perpetuate a story that isn't even true and has that at its root, murder, as being the only solution the one brother had to deal with the other brother, it leads to war. It leads to hate. It leads to all the other things that we're talking about. I think it's somewhat interesting that within that story, we think Eve ate the apple so that we can condemn women, when in fact men ended up with Adam's apples stuck in their throat. Interesting. They don't call it Eve apples. They call it Adam's apples. And what would be stuck in our throat? Choking on the words. Literally choking on the words that we're trying to use to save ourselves while we're actually suffocating.
Yeah, our language deceives. Our language betrays ourselves.
Well, we can use it that way, but you're pointing to the fact that we couldn't use it that way if we didn't know better, and we wouldn't use it that way if we didn't know better.
Yeah.
So the real self we're betraying is the actual reality that we have, the actual body, the actual experience, the actual essence that isn't the body. You know, I have a body that I've been given to be responsible for, like a plane. If you put the pilot in the seat of the plane, somebody's given them they generally don't own the plane. Fighter pilots don't own the plane, the government owns them, but they put them in that seat and say, take care of this thing. This is $80 million worth of aircraft. Don't crash it. Do your best. They're asking them to do that with everything they can muster. And we've been given this body and being asked to do everything we can with it, with everything we can muster. But we're crashing a lot and thinking it's just some vicarious thing. Oh, well, you know, people die. Yeah, well, of course we die. Birth is the leading cause of death. But to die prematurely, to die seemingly accidentally, to die at the hands of others under the guise of being the only thing they can do, thinking it's somehow saving them, having people kill people for the sake of thinking they're getting ahead. Probably not the healthiest thing we can do. Probably not within the natural order of things. And if you look at nature, you don't see trees killing the tree next to them to get that sunlight. They share it. They work together. They share the water. They take what they need, no more. They allow the rest of it to happen. There's a beauty in it and a symmetry, synchronicity. It's all there. It's all part of it. That's what we are. It's what we have now and don't often bother to talk about. Not as some philosophical, theoretical, out there woo-woo, you got to do this, you got to do that, you need sage and incense and all kinds of other things. Those are all nice. But to have something to do to make it happen is to think without that thing we do, it doesn't happen. It sort of discounts the point of something being absolute and infinite and unlimited and omnipotent and all-powerful. But again, puts it in our hands so we can control it and we can say we did it and we're the ones, look at me, I'm free. I worked so hard to get free. Well, I was free all along, working hard to pretend I wasn't. That's the issue. It's a little embarrassing at first, but eventually it's laughable. That imposter syndrome is not an accident. We're imposing ideas. Imposition of ideas weigh things in our experience. They don't really weigh anything, but it feels like they do. And enough of them turn to depression. Depression isn't accidentally used in that way. It's talking about weight. If you try to push a wall over, it feels like the wall's pushing back if you want to blame it. But if you stop pushing, the wall gets to do what it's doing and you get to see it never fought you at all. It was your own impetus to run into it head on that hurts your head. It's not the wall. We have freedom of choice, and to use that freedom to give ourselves an experience of condemnation and contempt for others is a choice that freely made. And to see it that way is to see the sickness of that kind of thinking and the debilitating effects and the harm done or the potential harm done. And I would say if we're harming anyone, we're harming everyone because it's maintaining this sort of cohesiveness around these ideas that it's the only thing we can do. And I'm not suggesting there aren't defensible options in a world that's run amok. If you're driving safely, you're probably seeing other people who aren't, and it would be unwise to make believe they're safe and going to be thinking about you. To be ready for things that you don't expect is smart in a world that's happening the way that ours is. But I especially know that because I know the kind of actions I would have taken in that same instance would have been completely unpredictable because they were erratic. Just big ideas I had all of a sudden to floor it and try to get into the other lane when there's no room for me to get there. It's as much as it takes to cause severe accident. Just that impulse, thinking that every thought that comes to me, I got to act on immediately because it's so right. It's the only thing I can do. It's who I am. Poppycock.
Jack, I've been trying to reconcile this whole, ego death I was talking about earlier with what you were talking about afterwards about, um, the ego never having existed in the first place. And maybe that's what ego death, maybe that's the best way to think about it. It's like the death of the ego is the skewering it for what it really is. It's just like an imagined, partition of our brain. You know what I mean? The ego death that we might long for, that we might have an instinct is like good for us, is actually just a realization and acceptance that it was never there as something separate in the first place. It's not that there's something tangible with something else tangible underneath. It's just, accessing ourselves as a whole with awareness is the ego death.
Well, and Bill talks about delusion. Delusion is an illusion being thought to be real. What's an illusion?
Yeah.
Thought. When you think of things, think of your thinking tends to create pictures of those things. You tend to have a narrative going on in your head about those things. There's a story developing. It's like a script. You're making a movie. And in your brain, you're thinking about the person and the place and the thing and what they did and how they said it, what they looked like, and all that kind of stuff. It's all imagined. So if imagination is used to become reality, that's illusion as reality, which is delusion. And delusion is insanity. And insanity doesn't exist in reality. It exists in thinking about reality rather than actual reality. So if the thing we're struggling with, this is the greatest essence of substance abuse. If what we're struggling about has no basis in reality, we think it has substance to be able to struggle with. We've imbued it, our power, and just like a lie has no basis. The basis of a lie is thinking something false is true or something true is false. So in either direction you go, you're trying to have the thing it can't be become the thing you claim it is. It's impossible. Think of the effort. Endless effort, no potential possibility. So if the thing I think I have, an ego, has no basis whatsoever, I've imbued it with substance. This is the substance abuse. I've imbued it with having substance when it has no substance, and it's all what I think about it. It's a denominator that's zero, and I keep putting more and more on the numerator. I keep creating more and more excuses, rationalized excuses, justifications. There's no justification and rationalization in truth and reality. It's only attempting to maintain a lie. So whenever you're justifying and rationalizing, you can be absolutely certain you're trying to secure a thought that has no basis. We have all the effects we need to begin to be honest about what's happening because we're being given all the information right now, always. But we've been misreading it and mistaking it so long as being the actual read that we've thought lack of nature is our nature and lack of power is our power. Think about that. We've been lying about the power. If there's an absolute power, I can't have that power if I'm not part of that power. And if I'm part of that power, I can't be apart from that power. So the whole idea of being separate and alone and displaced is thinking of, we're actually feeling accurate assessments of a thought that has no basis in reality. Our body's giving us that sensation. You don't belong here. There is no place. You don't belong anywhere because you're thinking your thoughts are real. You think you belong where nothing can possibly exist. Why do people want to kill themselves? They think they're actually going to that. That's a suicidal thought right there. I'm going to empower something that has no power and wonder why I feel like I need to kill myself. It's insanity. It's literally developing a dream and considering the dream real. And even when we have nightmares, we wake up and immediately say, oh my God, it was a dream. What a relief. We don't do it during the day. The daydreams, the sleepwalking is us. We think it is. It isn't. It's just fantasy on crack or whatever you choose. Whatever you choose. It's not going to make it real ever. And so to your point, Evan, coming to terms with that, when I started coming to terms with that, I got sick. I literally threw up a blob of mucus, acidic mucus that was the size of my fist because I got so sick and I realized that was all the nausea that had been building in my stomach from the acids that had been brewing in there, from the thinking I was doing about terrifying things and trauma that didn't really exist, but I was imagining it existed. And it just built this thing. And when that left my body, I never had that same sensation again that I used to get in the pit of my stomach. Think about that. We talk about the pit in our stomach. That was the pit in my stomach. It was literally almost looked like an undeveloped embryo of some form of life in that mucousy sort of transparent, not quite transparent thing. Went down the toilet out of my body, it didn't come back. I still have those pangs because I'm more sensitive now to the initiation of those things rather than having to wait 30 years to start to feel the accumulation of those things and finally confront them. Because nature will naturally heal us where we've been thinking it needed to be supernatural and some miracle. It isn't. The miracle is we keep making believe thinking's going to turn into reality and it never will. That's the miracle. That we could be so convinced and so saturated in our own intoxication with our thinking and consumed by it at the same time and not notice something seriously wrong here. We're getting all the bells and whistles are going out, the dashboard on the plane, all the lights are flashing, and we're saying, I got this. We haven't crashed yet. We're still 500 feet above the earth in a nosedive, wondering why we're afraid of the future. It's not an accident. It's absolutely,
Yeah.
the clarity is so profound when you start noticing it and then realize how much effort we've been putting into reshaping it and reconforming it and reconstituting it to constantly justify it and rationalize it as real and true. Well, I'm experiencing it. It feels real. Okay, well, so is hitting your head. But if you stop, it doesn't still feel that way. We're doing stupid things and feeling stupid and embarrassed as a result. It isn't that we're stupid, we're just acting stupid. People aren't idiots. If somebody was an idiot, you'd expect them to do the idiotic things. We're surprised when people do idiotic things because we know better. We know that they're more than that. We know that they have an absolute countenance that is worthy of faith and trust and all of the things that we might think are vacuous and difficult to find. Profound is for finding. And when we find, we think it's profound because it's so far beyond the limits of that lack of comprehension we had of the things we were imagining were reality. Think of incomprehensible demoralization that the book talks about. Why are we demoralized? We're thinking immorally. I'm the creator of reality. I got to get everybody to agree with me. That's my job. Now they're threats. Wonder why I wear out all the time. Wonder why I want to hide out all the time. Because when I'm hiding out, I can nurture all those thoughts and nobody interferes with them. I think I'm better off. What am I doing? Become more insane. Become more convinced I'm in control. What am I in control of? Nuttiness.
That's why we isolate, because we can't go out in the public, because then it disappears.
Well,
light hits it.
Yeah, well, and you begin to realize that you're at risk of somebody saying, you know what, you're out of your fucking mind. And then be offended by them when they're actually giving us very good information.
They're attacking me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we think our thoughts can attack us. Think of that. There's another egoistic idea that the ego is attacking me. My ego is getting the better of me. We really have to think it's alive and separate from us to be able to do that. Because if you begin to realize you've created it, and I've had, I don't know how many people at my bar in the kitchen where I make coffee and sort of have people occasionally hit their forehead and say, to think they're real would be crazy. That's crazy. When they start seeing it, and I'm like, bingo, you just got it. It's not real. It's not sincere. It's not honest to make believe things that are imagined. What we've done is, interestingly, is taken imagination, which is our greatest asset to be able to conceive of things bigger than anything ever done. Doesn't mean that can be done, but the fact that we can conceive of it is a magnificent asset. And we've turned it into making believe we're the creators of reality and then become diminished by reality. And our functional capacity becomes diminished to the point that we're barely able to make a living, have relationships that are meaningful. All the bedevilments describe the kind of pitiful demoralization that comes from immoral thinking. And what would be immoral? Not moral, certainly. What would be moral? Principles that work. Not, I can do something impossible and have it happen. That's a principle, but it's an evil principle. It's a demonic principle in the sense that we actually create the experience of impossibility by making believe that we can create reality when there's no lack of reality. There's nothing to create if it's absolute. That's the absurdity of it. I mean, if reality was 20% of everything, there would be 80% left to create. We could add to it and probably get some credit for it. But there isn't. We're talking about something that's immeasurable, inviolable, immutable, indivisible, and invisible at the same time. And yet we know it's here. We know it's us. We know that we know, or we wouldn't be so quick to understand what's wrong in our experience. We know it because we have an absolute, stable, quiet, subtle, still source. And any ripple on that pond we're aware of, we notice. that we're causing it.
I can remember being a very small child.
Being what?
And a parent. I can remember being a very small child and a parent, one of my parents telling me reality is perception. Reality is perception. And that is not what I think I'm going to be telling my children.
Well, and to see, my dad was in World War II, and he was in Japan at one point. He was stationed over there, and he loved the Japanese culture. I mean, here we just wiped him out, and he's in Tokyo, and he loved their culture. It's pretty interesting that he could see through all that we had done and still have an appreciation. But he said, somebody said to him over there that things can be as I think they are, they can be as you think they are, but ultimately they're as they are. And I remember when he said that, as a kid, I thought, oh, that's very interesting. Like there's life beyond the thinking is what it's pointing to. It's that we can think about it, but it's like a preposition. It's above, below, next to, it's around. We're not thinking about the thing. We're really thinking about the thinking about the thing. Because if the thing has any basis, it doesn't need us to think about it to have that basis. And there's great freedom in that, and great up and comings per se, in terms of the well-being, the sense of the loftiness of ideals and the awareness of the potential to be incorporated into it all rather than disassociated with it all. So, but most of that mythology, if you look back through history, you're going to find it all over the place. Because this stuff has been still today. People say you create your own reality. Think about that. It would mean there's some missing reality until we create it. Well, that's not infinite. That would be a gap. That would mean there's absolutely no reality. And why would we be based in reality, imagining and thinking there's no reality, and not be traumatized, present traumatic stress being caused? There's no greater fear we could have is to think we don't belong. And yet you can't think you don't belong if you don't belong. When you start looking at it honestly, how would I even be able to conceive of not belonging if I wasn't here belonging? And it kind of blows the bubble, the simplicity of it and the ignorance of it, ignoring the facts rather than beginning to confirm the facts and say, oh, I couldn't think of that if I didn't have a place, if I didn't belong. It would never occur to me. And it starts being funny that we would take things so seriously that are so abysmally paltry and lacking in any sort of substance or alignment with what's actually going on. But it's an indication of how far we can go in imagination. It's just going to lengths where we're actually beginning to threaten the entire species that might be worth noting before we accomplish that, because that would not be success. And it would be too late to notice if we accomplished it. So just like for each of us, suicide, I did a study of people who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and there were almost 400 of them. And I think a small double digits, but maybe 15 or 20% or something survived. And every one of them, but about 6 or 7 that went back and did it again to kill themselves, said as soon as they let go, nothing was as bad as this. Immediately. As soon as they had as soon as they were confronting the consequence of their thought, they had clarity in their thinking immediately and realized nothing that was going, everything got very small. All the things they thought were so big to warrant it became almost nothing in the face of what they did. And there again,
the temporal horizon shrunk in the moment
to nothing. Completely, but that moment of clarity, do we need to face those things? And part of during COVID, I did a lot of research on near-death experiences. And it's interesting, as people get near death, they had these enormous clarity, this enormous broadening of clarity about life. So why is it we need to be near death before we recognize that we're always near death because we don't know when it's coming? And that why do we need to face death before we get honest about life? If we aren't doing death-defying things, thinking that's all we're able to do, that all we can do is tempt fate and prove that we can beat it occasionally to prove we're in charge, rather than start functioning on a level that actually begins to address the fact that we are much more than we think. We are much more aware than we think. We have much more knowingness than we think. and begin to actually concede it. And a lot of that thinking starts to dissipate very quickly. And that knowingness and that awareness starts to be expressed in our thinking almost immediately, if not immediately. It's always been there. We're just simply not acting on it. So to a point earlier that I think you made, Evan, when I was talking about not saying the right thing and just saying what I'm thinking, I don't have to say the right thing, to be honest. And I used to in my brain when I was sort of on this self-centered idea, and think about thinking of itself as the self I think I'm centered on, when in fact I'm thinking centered, not self-centered at all. It's just my thinking about my thinking that I'm thinking is me. But the idea was that I was wrong all the time, so I always had to be right. So I didn't say things until I felt they were right. And then anybody who didn't think like I did, all of a sudden I'd feel like I was in an argument with them over that rightness, because they were sort of casting shadows on my brilliance, my light. But the other thing was that when I started speaking more openly about what I was thinking, that I realized would be objectionable, but it was incredibly freeing, and actually began to create relationships with people because they were thinking, well, hell, if he can talk openly, I can probably mention to him what I'm thinking too. And all of a sudden, all that personal thing, don't take it personally, goes away because there's no person to take it. It's just a thought being shared. So the same point about you talked about trial and error. The trial and error is standing in the face of all possibility and noticing that most of the possibilities we take action on are wrong. Starting to see that we're wrong a lot, but the ultimate goal is starting to take advantage of that experience and learn from it and be thankful and appreciative, which we will be when we want to learn naturally. It's not something we need to muster. I don't have to have more gratefulness to all of a sudden appreciate it, because all of a sudden I'm saying, wait a minute, this is life's terms right here in my midst that I'm looking at openly and honestly. And life is telling me exactly what I'm doing, and I'm hearing that it's wrong. There's no lack of benefit to that. I can actually adjust. I can actually start saying, if it's telling me so clearly what's wrong, it's actually telling me what's right. And now I have a potential to begin to relate to it in that way and think of it in those terms well before the trial and error would probably lead me there 90,000 trips from now or tries from now. Because I'm keenly alert in my thinking to my awareness rather than desensitized and numb and ignoring what's happening as the basis of thinking I'm actually controlling what's happening. So acting wrong, just do whatever. I had a friend who was 20 years in a marriage, and he said, my wife never appreciates or respects me. And I said, would she? You're always lying to her. He said, but I always try to do what she wants. I said, exactly. She knows that you're full of shit. She knows you're trying to make her happy just to make nice, not because it's really your sincere interest. You just don't want to hear from her, and you're trying to put her out of your misery rather than, So I said, just say what you're thinking to her. So 2 weeks later, he said, she's never appreciated me more. He says, it's bizarre. I said, yeah, because she can trust you. She can trust you. Trust is important between humans. And what we know we can trust about most humans is that they're mistrustful. And that's a bad example for us to begin to continue to perpetuate, because it continues to make believe that faith in faithless ideas and hope in hopeless ideas is actually going to help them come true someday if I have more faith and hope. It gives both of those words a bad name. Because when we hope for something that's possible, it happens. And we have faith in something that's possible, it happens. We don't need any more faith. It starts to act on it very quickly, because we're aligning with it. We'll know what to do. We'll intuitively know what to do. It used to baffle us. Book tells us that. So if you think of the book as you read it from the absolute state, you'll start noticing that Bill's been telling us that too, because he's moving us from hyper self-centeredness, meaning manic, complete self-will run riot. All that's happening is what I think. There is nothing else. I'm alone in the world and have to fight everything and everyone else to survive. To seeing that the end of those thoughts is actually the beginning of all other thoughts and all other ideas and imagination and all that. So rather than having my back up against the wall of that self, I think that idea of self, all of a sudden I turn and say, oh, that's the horizon. The whole world's beyond the horizon. When the sailors started saying, they saw things they didn't expect, tropical islands and palm trees and all kinds of aqua water, warm water, all that stuff. They didn't think it was there because they thought the end of the world was the end of that. We do the end of the horizon was the end of the world. We do that in our thinking. So that's the subjective and objective. And then the absolute is beginning to see that everything has always been everything all along, regardless of what we thought of it subjective or objectively. Objectivity just gives us a chance to begin to see that everybody else is thinking things too. Okay, I can live with that. That makes sense. They have bodies, they have brains, they would be thinking. That's not a threat. Actually, the potential of our capacity as a species becomes apparent when you begin to see that if I can think better and I can feel better as a result of it and actually function better, if we can actually start to collaborate in a way that allows that conversation to extend and expand, we could be doing things that would seem absolutely impossible today in very short order. Wouldn't take long at all because the immediacy of it has always been present. We've just been busy fighting it as though somehow or another will prove that right is wrong and somehow prevail. We've been good at that. If we've been that good at something that's impossible, imagine what would happen as we begin to turn collectively to all that is possible. The magnificence, the immediacy, the satisfaction, the healing, the unexpected consequences, because all of our expectations are built in the ideas that all that should happen is what I think should happen. And if all that's going to happen is what I think that's going to happen, and my thinking is screwed up to begin with, I'm only going to think things that shouldn't happen are going to happen. So it's a big transition in a very, very simple approach. And I appreciate you guys talking about this. And I know, Evan, that you and I had a talk, and Harry and I had a talk recently, and Paul and I had a talk. And I'm going to extend more into the individual talks. And if you guys have the time during the week to listen to one another, I think we'll have more to talk about collectively as we start listening and saying, oh, he's thinking in different ways exactly what I do. And that bond is very hard to deny when you see it, because it is, in fact, the one we've always had. It's the interconnectedness. That interreaction is a choice. Interaction is our natural state.
I would just like to state that I listened to both Evans and Harris, and they both were wonderful for me. So I appreciate you guys putting yourself out there for me.
Thanks, Mark. That's good to hear. And you and I are going to do one too, Mark, because you've had way too much to say in my ears for me to want to have you not say the same in a recorded environment where other people can listen. It's really been fascinating to watch your growth and your interest and the steps you've been taking that seem to consistently reveal something that's pretty adventurous and pretty spectacular in your experience. And I believe that when we start to consider the infinite in relation to the pettiness of this single life we think we've been living, it's not hard to become pretty enthusiastic about the absolute nature of nature and the absolute capacity that we have in this life, during this lifetime, not waiting for the next one when karma can finally be corrected. But actually, isn't that convenient too? The whole idea of karma only the next life. So I'm just committed to being an idiot this life, because that's just the way it is. But I'll fix it next time. Pretty convenient. So my sense is karma is immediate, and it's called consequence. And we're always facing it. We're always creating it. We're always witnessing it. If we look at it as a mirror, we'll start seeing that it's actually reflecting our thinking, and that it's actually giving us good direction because it's giving us perspective on things. We can't see our own eyeball. We often can't see our own thoughts until we see the impact of those thoughts and we see the interaction of those thoughts. And I find often when I'm thinking petty things about others, I know that I'm thinking petty thoughts about my own experience and existence immediately. And I say, oh, I'm up to something. What my mother used to say, you're up to something. And I'd say, no, I'm not. And that was the point at which she knew absolutely I was up to something. As soon as I fought, she knew, oh, no, I got it. This time I got it. I could see dead to rights. I see your eyes. I know. How would I think my mother, the only person I've ever lived in, would have less information about me than I might? How clever. As a young boy. She doesn't know. Yeah, she knew. Oy vey.
Yeah.
Even at 55, she still knows more about me than I do.
Well, and it's good, Mark, I know that you're having sort of a renaissance in your family and talking and opening up and dealing with things that you probably kept to yourself for a long time. It's interesting how flexible the family becomes when we become flexible. and how hardened they can seem and what a perfect excuse. They're impossible. They're never going to listen, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, they've definitely embraced it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too. I mean, the idea of willingness, when you're willing to do something healthy, is the willingness to start facing things that have been unhealthy, honestly. And it gives, because it's an illusion, it gives way so quickly that all of the things we thought we were running from that were impossible was the maintenance of the impossible idea right now that made them think, had us think that. It wasn't because those things were impossible, because they're easy to face once you face them and you begin to see that it actually dissolves the problem rather than resolves it, coming up with a new maintenance program, which is actually a maintenance program which maintains the problem. Resolution is, that's why we have resolutions every year. Apparently, things we don't do the whole year, we're going to magically do on the first of the year. Like, why, if I have 364 days to figure out how not to do it, is one day going to magically have me do it? My whole training has been in not doing it. So that's why people have resolutions every year. The one 35 years ago, I made a resolution never to make any resolutions. I've succeeded every year. It's simple, it's easy. We can complicate it, we can make it hard. It's a choice we make. It's nothing other than that. If the freedom is here, it's always available. If the freedom we use is to feel condemned, that is a choice. And to begin to notice that is to begin to actually sit a little longer with the thinking and say, oh, no, could it be I've been at the center of this the whole time? And it isn't me that's been at the center, it's my misuse of thinking. That's it. Rather than use it productively, I've been using it dysfunctionally and thinking that obsessive thinking is the only thing I can do. And as a result, the only thing I can do next. And I just continue. It isn't true, never will be, and I will never get better doing that. I'll just get better at thinking wrong is right and right is wrong, and thinking that lies are true, and all the other corrupt bases that discourage me and take that confidence and ambition and all that potential to function at a level of full capacity, because I've been acting functionally illiterate, not reading the signs, not acting on the actual information I've been given. So functional literacy is starting to notice our body language is speaking not only to us, but in our domestic language. It's not foreign, and to act like it is to dismiss it and thinking that there's nothing there, because it unravels the ideas we have about who we are. The death of the self is one that's never existed. To begin to consider that can be very, very frightening, because it's so compelling to make believe that we're the creator of it all, rather than we're a product of creation rather than the creator of creation. But we can create a mess.
Sure can. Thank you, Jack.
Love you guys. Thanks, Gabe, Mark, Evan,
Thanks, Jack.
Harry.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jack. Thanks,
Bye.
Evan. Gabe.
Thanks.